The conversations surrounding mental health in the Black community have increased over the years with the increased number of police-related killings, the COVID-19 pandemic, economic inequality, and more awareness and understanding surrounding the trauma that one experiences just by being Black in America. May is National Mental Health Month, and the Chicago Defender spoke with advocate Matthew Kincaid about the effects of systemic racism and societal pressures on Black men and what society can do to minimize the stigma around Black men prioritizing their emotional and mental well-being. So I want to start with a conversation about mental health and Black men, particularly, as we highlight mental health month, but also because Black men and mental health has been in the news a lot, just as we deal with different celebrities and things that have kind of been happening. Can you speak to this kind of, I guess the fact that we're talking about it more, Black men and mental health? Can you speak to why you think that is now?
Well, one, thank you so much for the time and for having me on to speak about these things. I think that the fact that this conversation is happening is at least some evidence that the stigma that exists in our community broadly, that oftentimes pushes people to be afraid to seek out mental help or to access mental health services. Hopefully that stigma is being reduced, right? And people are now understanding that not only is this something that is normal, it's something that's almost a requirement if you're living in and existing in a society that is still operating under this kind of veil of white supremacy and patriarchy and, all these other systems that, people in our communities have to live with. My fear is that while we're starting to have the conversation about how important mental health services are for all people of color, namely Black people, and in particularly this conversation, Black men, I don't see a lot being done to connect people to the resources that we need in order to change this from being a conversation into action, right? Where we're starting to heal as a community.
Right. And, it's been, reported these issues of trauma and things we've been talking about a little bit more. Can you speak to the effect of racism on our mental health, particularly Black men's mental health? Culturally, Black men are told to, pull it close, hold it in. And it's coming out that that's just not the best way to handle this. What role has systemic racism played in the deterioration of our mental health and in how we actually maintain our mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously there, as a result of, toxic forms of masculinity, there's already this very limited set of emotions that are socially acceptable for men broadly, right? Whereas it might not be socially acceptable for a person to cry or for men to engage with other men in emotional conversations about the traumas that they're experiencing or their pain or their emotions or whatever the case may be. But it is socially acceptable for men to be lash out violently or to be aggressive or to kind of blow up and go off the handle. Well, those things are, of course, always, whatever is happening for any group at large is usually happening, in a more concentrated nature within our community. And so when you look at Black men, you're facing these kind of dual stigmas. You're receiving all of those same messages of toxic masculinity, that there's this limited range of emotions that are socially acceptable, while also dealing with the dynamics of racism, which oftentimes takes away the little bit of power that Black men do feel like they have in society, right? Systemic racism impacts our ability to access jobs, especially quality jobs where you can provide for your family, which obviously within the realm of masculinity is a very important thing, and that impacts mental health. Systemic racism impacts our ability to access care, and whether or not when we access healthcare, we'll be believed about pain or that we'll be receive, equal care. Systemic racism impacts our ability to do well in school. We know that Black and brown children, especially Black boys, are, over targeted for discipline in school. So what happens is that you have this long-term exposure to this system that is impacting your ability to be educated, that's impacting your ability to earn a living wage, that's impacting your ability to advocate for your health, that's impacting your ability to take care of your family. And then you're existing within a culture that says, well, you just got, toughen up and march through all of that. And that's too much for anybody to carry. And if we don't seek out the support that we need, then we'll kind of continue to see this destroy us from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. And I'm particularly seeing this in young boys, these kind of lessons that have been passed down through generations about what masculinity is and what being a man is all about. And you see it reflected in young boys. I'm thinking about when Jay-Z did his 444 album and did the kind of preludes, those notes, and it was just Black men in very regular, everyday situations, just talking about what it meant to be married, what it meant to go through divorce or adultery or find the burden or the stress of being a provider, and how people gravitated to that conversation and thought it was so great, that, Black men are having these conversations. What can we do as a society to make that more normal? So that Black men can feel, we often talk about creating safe spaces. What can we do as a society to create a space where Black men feel comfortable expressing vulnerability without being perceived as weak?
Yeah, I love the word that you use, normalization. I always think about this story. Before I founded this organization, Overcoming Racism, I used to do anti-oppression work mostly with youth. And I'll never forget, there was a time where we were doing a session on masculinity, and we had kind of split our students out. And so, I had a group of, boys who identified as boys, and we're talking about a lot of the messages that we had received as men, and quite frankly, a lot of the trauma. And, these were like high school age students. And one by one, these students went around in this circle that they were sitting in and talked about having experienced violence from another man for showing some sort of emotion. Some of them talked about having lost a friend, but to gun violence, but not having a vehicle or means to express that. And so what they started to see was this commonality of all of these triggers that they had experienced in their young lives, and oftentimes being met by an older male adult that, either punched them in the chest and said, boys don't cry, or suck it up, or whatever the case may be. And the defining moment of this experience was that this was a very tense environment. One of the young boys, he hits the door, and I walk outside the door to go check on him. And he's outside bawling, crying. And I asked him, I said, would you be willing to go back into the room and keep processing your emotions, but to just do it in the room with the rest of the participants? Because his natural response was, I need to cry, but I can't do it here.
Yeah.
And so he walks back into this room and sits back down. I kind of walk around the circle, and one by one, just kind of touch, the different boys in the group, and just let it go, let it go. And before you know it, the entire room is crying. We all cried, we hugged. And when it was time to walk out of the room to be back into the whole group with the rest of the students, it was like this physical reaction. They all sucked up their tears. And so I think that we have to learn. I tell this story to say we have to learn how to be okay with sharing this emotion. That was a healing moment for those young boys, but they also knew that environment was not the same as the environment that they were going to be in the second they walked out of that door.
Yeah.
And so we need to, of course, make safe spaces like that room in that camp where we're having these conversations. But until we make society more safe for men to have the wide range of human emotions, then we're going to continue to unprogram ourselves from this new understanding that it's okay to share emotion, and reprogram ourselves into this long-term understanding that leads to self-destruction.
This is Danielle Sanders reporting for the Chicago Defender and Real Times Media.